Thank you for coming, everybody. I want to concentrate at first on why I switched to grass. I grew corn and soybeans for 25 years, and now I've been in grass for 20. Best thing I ever did, should have done it when I was 20 years old, is what I should have done, and if I would have, my life would be a lot different and a lot better. And when I say why, what I really want to talk about is why you might want to do it, why you might want to plant grass, or what the reasons for it would be. Maybe one of the fundamental things that made me switch was the size of my operation. I am currently, and have been for the last 20 years, making a living on 440 acres of ground with cattle, and at first sheep, and I have switched since to goats. And there's only one way I could have done that, and it's with grass. It's counterintuitive. It's really hard for people to get, because my neighbors right across the road on the same type of land are grossing over $1,000 an acre. But they spend it all on inputs, pretty much all of it. Well, that's why they're complaining right now. They're losing money. They spend it all on inputs, plus some, and then the government has to pay the rest. And you're in a really different place here, because everywhere we go, even in this type of agriculture, all our sponsors are selling inputs. I went the entire opposite direction, completely 180. I haven't purchased fertilizer of any kind, organic or otherwise, in over 20 years, none. And my grass is the best grass in my area, year after year. There's no question about it, whether it's fertilized or not. It's because of management. It's because of the intensive grazing that I've done, and some other little secrets. And in fact, even, and I'll get to it, but even some cheating in a way, because I am fertilizing, but I still don't buy fertilizer. And I'm just going to complain, but I had a cheat sheet to help me here. So if I do a lot of and whatever, it's because I don't have a piece of paper that has the in between what all of these are. So, but let's see, where would I go next? Size was only one of the reasons I switched to grass. I wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And I lived in a high nitrate groundwater area. And I had talked to Dennis Sheets earlier this morning and asked him if I remembered this right. And he said, yeah, you're pretty much right on the money. And that's that they had done a brief study on some irrigated grass in the Creighton, Nebraska area, in the Brazil area years ago, and tested for nitrogen getting through grass. And it virtually does not, no matter what. It was a good stand of grass, and they could fertilize with nitrogen and then test in the vadose zone, and there would be zero nitrogen. Grass just uses it and takes it. So, as I said, I wanted to be part of the solution. And I was in a high nitrogen area. So that was also part of the reason I chose to do grass. But the main one was the fact that my combiner was he was retiring. Had done my combining ever since I'd started growing corn. You can't afford a combine for 3/4 of crops. So it meant that I was going to be looking for another combiner, and I was running old, small equipment that was not up to date, of course, and I could move away from all that by going to grass. So I just abandoned what everybody else thinks of as technology, and I bought a 4-wheeler and some polywire reels and put out high tensile fence and started planting grass. And interesting story there, because What I do is called holistic management, and in fact, the term holistic, I think the word was actually coined by a man named Alan Savory. He wrote a book in 1973, so this isn't new stuff. And it was called holistic management. And I've had the great good fortune to actually meet Mr. Savory and talk to him personally. So got to ask him some questions. But what holistic management is making the most of what you have. And that's what it's about. You're not going to change your environment. You're going to make the most of how you use it. And with grazing, that's, to me, pretty darn clearly rotational grazing. The higher your stock density, the better your grass is going to do. Put another way, the less land your cattle are exposed to at any given time, the more grass you're going to grow. But period, end of sentence. If you've got them, even, and I'm really not kidding, even down to the size of this room, would be beneficial if you could afford to spend the time to continually move them like that. And some people do that. So I know people who move cattle 4, 5, 6 times a day and grow grass like you cannot believe. It just keeps getting better and better the smaller area you get. But there's a limitation because you can literally spend all day out there. And if you've got 1,000 head of cows, that's one thing. You can hire somebody to do it. They'll pay for you. Which when you're my size, which I've got right now about 150 cattle and 150 goats, and that's not enough income to where I can afford to hire somebody to do it. And if I do it myself, I don't do anything else. And so I, in summertime, usually move once a day. And I wonder if that picture's on here. This is roughly what my fields look like. It's not my fields, but long, narrow strips like this. And I'll have a water line under each strip. These are just high tensile fences. One strand of high tensile wire that I can hook up and electrify. And then I have water lines under every other fence that go clear out to the back end of the field so that I can water them. Say if this is the end where the water's coming from and I get clear out here, I can lock them out there and I've got a water source that I can hook up to. And so that's how I do it. And let's see, what was I going to say about that? Well, when I first went to do this, it was going to cost a lot of money for me to make that infrastructure like that. And of course I worried about it, didn't have a ton of money and wondered about that. But what got me over the hump was when I realized that the main herbicide concoction that I had been using up until that point, when I was growing corn and beans, cost me just as much as doing all of this per acre, on a per acre basis. And that helped me get over the hump of spending this large sum of money. I was doing it every year with this herbicide, and this I did 1 year, and I'm still using it over 20 years later, the same stuff. I am starting to replace the water lines because they rot in the sun and eventually start leaking. So I am replacing the water lines, but the fence lines they'll last forever. So monetarily, that's how I made it work in my head, is I compared it to the costs I was putting into these crops and never making any money, just like it is now. There just never was money in crops. So then we come to the planting and the growing of what I grew. I started seeding grass in the fall of 2004. And this is an example of how much I've learned, because when I first started planting grass, one of the grasses I planted was a perennial ryegrass, which is a fantastic grass. It's the highest energy grass that there is. That's one of the reasons I planted it. I was planning on producing grass-fed beef. And high energy is, even in grass, it will fatten cattle. So I planted this ryegrass. Well, turns out ryegrass is very dependent on extreme high fertility, which didn't match very well with my goal of eliminating purchased inputs. So that area, which I never replanted, but the area where I started with that ryegrass, you can still see it. It's there, but it's just one of dozens of grasses that are now growing there. And I had already learned the second year, and I planted some more the second year, and I planted more of a cool season mix. Still wasn't planting any warm season, but I was planting 10, 15 cool season grasses along with a couple kinds of clover and white and red clover, and also alfalfa, usually 3 or 4 pounds of alfalfa per acre. And before it was over with, before I finally planted the last piece of it, was when I met Alan Savory. I had like 35 acres to go. And I met Alan Savory, and I'd heard a rumor that he was saying that you didn't even need to plant. I got to ask him personally. I'd heard this rumor, and so I asked him personally, do I need to plant this at all? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, what you need will be there. What you need. You don't know what you need. When you're planning something like this, you think you know what you need, but I'd already proven to myself that I didn't know what I needed. And so for those last 35 acres, I followed his advice and didn't plant a thing. Got the same amount of grazing out of it. It looked awful, but I got the same amount of grazing on it. And today you can't tell that I didn't plant that. It has the same, or not exactly the same, but the same species, not in the same mix, but it has the same species that I've got everywhere else. So even planting it wasn't necessary. I could have just started grazing. And one of the things, and this is kind of looking back, but I had already figured that out on my own, because when I would plant the grass, the first graze I got in that first year was always what everybody else calls weeds. And cattle would just go nuts. They loved it. They loved to be turned into that patch of weeds, and did fine on it. And then the grass would start growing as soon as you grazed it down. The part about the grass filling in and becoming a stand of grass, I didn't know that yet, but I had seen that weeds weren't a problem, not a problem at all. Some weeds are, well, I'll give a direct example, and that's that we were talking, the group that was up here were talking about grazing summer annuals. Foxtail is a summer annual grass. And if you graze it when it's vegetative, it's just as good as sorghum Sudan or anything else. It's a summer annual grass. And crabgrass is fantastic feed. Cattle will pull it up and eat the roots and all if they need to. They absolutely love it. And so, and summer annuals, by the way, are higher in energy in the summer than cool season grasses are by far. So I sometimes manage to try and get foxtail and crabgrass to come in my grass. And it's pretty simple to do, really, and that's just to graze it really short early in the summer. So, what else to say about this picture? They are 330 feet wide. I've got 8 of them. That number is, if you take it times 8, will go across a quarter section. So that's what I have. I have 8 of those lanes on each quarter section. I've got a couple of long 80s that are fenced slightly differently. So I do have some of these strips that are as wide as 560 feet. But all I have to do in order to move cattle is run a polywire line across there like that. Posts only every 100 feet. I did that for measurement purposes, so I can tell you just exactly how many acres I'm doing because it's kind of standard. But I just have to run that polywire across, and these lines are electrified if I'm in there, so all I got to do is hook up a little clip and boom, I've got a hot wire. And then hooked to, I've got a series of spigots along there to hook to. In the earliest days when I had a brother helping me, we quite often would only move them 300 foot at a time. And just saw fantastic results. So, boy, I wish I had my cheat sheet. I can't think of anything else about that picture, though. That.
Mr. Morrow? Oh, so is that all planted the same species, or do you have your cool seasons and then, or then you rotate into your warmer seasons, or?
You know, that's a great question. It is not anything I planned, but for some reason, I'm sure that my soils or something, I don't know, but I have areas of the farm where it didn't matter what I planted, it turned into what it turned into. And other areas where it turned into something else. And so I have some of all of that. I have some places where warm seasons have already started to mix in with cool seasons. I have other places where there's no warm season showing up, to the point where I now sometimes harvest seeds. Here's a little trick for everybody, but when the warm seasons are starting to strip off and are ready to fall off, I'll take a plastic bag with me and I'll strip handfuls of them off and put it in that bag. And then when I'm in the area where the warm seasons haven't started, I'll just, as I'm driving my four-wheeler along, I'll just scatter a little string of seed out. And I've had success doing that. I've got warm seasons now coming where I've done that. So I would have hoped that it all would have come in that way on its own, but sometimes it seems to need a little help.
You never added any like clover?
When I originally planted, I did plant clover, red clover and white clover both, and sweet clover is there. And I knew that. I knew sweet clover, if you let ground rest, it'll come. So I have the 3 types of clover, and then I do plant alfalfa. I've planted alfalfa every time I planted. But here's a fun thing that I've discovered, and that's that alfalfa in this management regime sometimes shows up on its own. And most anybody that knows anything about alfalfa will tell you that doesn't work. But I've got proof. I've got places where I've got alfalfa that I never ever planted it, ever, at all. And yet I've had alfalfa come there volunteering. So what this enables when you start managing this land this way is surprising, to say the least. It's much more than the eye can see, and more than I think the human brain can comprehend. Changes start taking place when you start managing this way. So, sure.
What kind of fencing do you use for your goats?
What kind of what?
Do you use different fencing for your goats?
Boy, that's the most common and obviously the best question. But most of my place now is fenced on the perimeter with woven wire. And it took me several years to get that done, and it's hard work, and it's not as fun as riding a tractor and so on and so forth. But yes, the only places that I have on my perimeter that aren't woven wire are places where snow would drift badly, because snow drifts just destroy woven wire. So in those places, what I've done is I've put a wire at nose height for a goat in an offset insulator, a hot wire. And the offset insulators are about that long, I don't know, 6, 8 inches. And then I have a couple of high tensile wires behind that are attached directly to the post. And it's worked. I can tell you this about goats, and that's that you better check it every day, because they're checking it every day, basically, is what it amounts to. And so, but I honestly don't have much trouble having goats get out. And I think there's an obvious reason for that, and that's that they have they're always in at least an 80-acre field. And a lot of times they're in a 160-acre field, and there's more food than they can eat. And so they're happy and they're not looking. But by the way, I switched from sheep to goats. I had sheep for 15 years, and I switched from sheep to goats for a very specific reason, and that's leafy spurge. They will eat leafy spurge like it's candy, and actually seem to prefer it above anything else. There was a bad leafy spurge patch right near where I put their shelters, and goats do need shelter. They're not hardy enough to survive in Nebraska without shelter. But I set up the shelters when I originally got them near my worst patch of leafy spurge, and that spurge is gone. It is dead and gone. You never see even a spear of it. Most of the place, it's not gone, but it never gets to bloom. They keep it down in the grass so that it's just another plant in the landscape. So in that way, they're very superior, and money-wise, I think they make just as much money as sheep, maybe even a little more. I think you can average a higher amount of babies per mother with goats than you can with sheep. Sheep will certainly twin a lot, but goats, if they're in their second group, their second kidding, all have doubles at least, and quite a few triples, and some even 4. It's occasionally you'll get 4, and they'll feed them. That's a fascinating difference between sheep and goats, is that if a ewe has 3, you might as well take the third one and put it on a bottle, because it's going to starve. I don't think I ever saw a ewe raise 3 lambs, but goats will do it all the time. And in spite of the fact they just have two tits for them to suck on, they apparently share, because they'll raise 3. I've got several nannies that raise 3 every time. So I think there's just as much money, if not even maybe a little more, in goats. And
What's your market then for goats?
I go to either Platte, South Dakota, or Verdigris, Nebraska, and boy, they sold really good at Platte this summer, so I may be going specifically to Platte. And I'm pretty sure that all of them wind up in Minneapolis. The Somali population up there can't get enough goat, so either way, I think they're going northeast up towards Minneapolis. Yeah, you.
Okay.
Yep.
Question. So what breed of sheep are you using time you did have this?
I had Ramblay.
Is that a wool or
It is a wool variety, and back then I had a shearer in the neighborhood, and that's what actually happened. That's when I finally made the move. I lost my shearer and actually got a shearer that came from a long distance away, and just the mileage, it made it so it was costly, and obviously always was hard work, and so that played a part in the decision. And of course, I could have gone to hair sheep, but I figured if I was going to switch anyway, I might as well go to the ones that were going to eat the leafy spurge better. So that's how I made that decision. I should have had the goats in the first place, let's put it that way. It was a better fit for me in the first place. But I had a neighbor that had been in the sheep business, and he had facilities set up and everything, and he was talking to me about he was going to rent me, he was retiring, and he was going to rent me his facilities, and I really didn't put much thought into it. I just got sheep, but over time I learned. I can learn. It's just a slow process. So anyway.
How long does it take to get the cattle used to this routine?
You'd be shocked the next day for a lot of them. A lot of them figured out just immediately. It's just amazing. Pat used to do this and bring in yearlings. They'd come from, who knows where. And 4 days later, they'd be following him around like puppy dogs because they knew he was the candy man, They love it. I mean, they love this process. And when you're doing it every day, boy, they pile right up there and are waiting for you to reel that fence up a little bit so they can get through. In fact, if I'm ever going to get hurt by a cow, that's where it's going to happen, because they're cutting right behind you and bumping you, They're so eager to get through there that it's a little dangerous at times. So, and that gives you some indication how good of a deal it is. Got to go back there. I think I've already gone through most of this fencing and water, but we're on multi-species grazing. And I guess maybe what I wanted to talk about a little bit there was that you can go far beyond 2 species, way beyond that. I could have sheep too, if I wanted to. I could have, and did in the earliest days, raised hogs on pasture. And chickens, I've heard Joel Salatin mentioned around here so far today. The best known grass farmer on the planet is a man named Joel Salatin, who mostly what he sells, or what he sold in the first place anyway, was chicken. He paid for his farm by pulling little chicken tractors around. And the chickens would feed on the grass, and then he, of course, had corn in the pens too, and the chicken is way better than anything that comes out of a building, to say the least. And so chickens, turkeys, sheep, hogs, you name it, it can all be done on grass, and it can all be done on my grass. I'm just too damned old to do it all. That's just that simple. But that could all be being done on my place, and it wouldn't impact the cattle or the goats. If it did, it would be to enhance it. Because let's face it, wherever you drag that chicken coop is going to be fertilized with the hottest fertilizer that there is, manure-wise, chicken manure. So next year it's going to go double the grass it grew this year, just because of those chickens being there. It all works together, and they all enhance each other. Chickens love a cow pie. They absolutely love a cow pie. First thing they do is tear it up and eat the worms underneath it. The best protein there is for a chicken. So this stuff will all go together. And so when I say multi-species grazing, what I'm doing is 2 species, but it could easily be 5 or 6. if I wanted to go that way, and if I had the energy to go that way. So I'm getting great questions, so maybe that's just the way to go.
We went to a workshop one time where they had a pen of pastured hogs, and they just had to have a fence about so high, and they did a practice thing in their corral where they trained them to the hot wire first before they actually let them out there, and then they were totally fine. So I guess you just have to adjust the fence to the species that's in there.
Since we're on the subject, I'm going to describe what I believe is the cheapest way to raise pork that there is. I think it would even be cheaper than a building. I think you could sell pork for cheaper than what Jim Pillen can raise it for. I really do. And that's, I knew a guy named Greg Carlson. He was one of my mentors, one of the first pasture walks I ever went to. He grew up in Indiana, and the way he farmed, he didn't own any land, didn't own tractors or any of that stuff. He would rent out an alfalfa field that was due to be torn up. He had access to blems from a bin factory, the curved pieces that they bolt together to make a bin. If there was a blemish on it, they'd sell it to him for cheap, and he got 1,000 of those, and he'd scatter them out in that field, and he would breed gilts to farrow in late June or early July, and that was all the shelter they had. And hogs are smart enough, they'd go and nest underneath those rings and have their babies. But he had, what reminded me of it was what you said. They had a little pen where they had, if they wanted corn, that's where they had to go, is in this pen. So when it came time to catch them, that's all he had to do was get them a little hungry and then feed them some corn in the pen, and they'd all come in there. But then when it was time to wean the pigs, he would have a cornfield rented also. And once those pigs were weaned, he'd turn them into that cornfield. And so they did all the harvesting, did all the fertilizing, and so he saved a lot of money on his corn deal that way. And then they'd be, since they were born in June, they were basically ready midwinter. And at that point in time, he would have marked all the gilts in the best litters, whichever ones did the best. He would have earmarked them, notched an ear. And by the way, the ones that farrowed in the summer, once those pigs were weaned, they were fattened up and sold as fats, which that really spoke to me because my dad, that's what he always preferred when he raised hogs. What he preferred to put in our freezer was a gilt that had 1 litter of pigs, and then he'd fatten her up. That was the best pork in his mind. Well, that's what he was creating with all of these gilts that had pigs. He didn't keep them for a second litter. He sold them. And then he kept the gilts out of the best litters, and the whole thing started over again. So once it got to be January, he was down to just those gilts for the next year, and that's all he fed. And he kept them fed until they farrowed again in June, and the whole cycle started over again. And when you figure that out and figure that how much money he's saving on facilities and renting the cornfield already there rather than buying corn from a Cargill or wherever, it's incredibly cheap way to raise hogs. And like I say, I think it would compete even with confinements doing 100,000 pigs. So, and he did 1,000 gilts that way at times when he was living in Indiana, 1,000 of them. So anyway, you reminded me of that, so I couldn't help but tell the story since I knew it. But My next thing there is that it says hay is fertility. I mean that. Hay is fertility. You can look it up. There are websites that you can look up to see how much fertilizer a bale of hay contains. It's on the internet. And then, in fact, there's several calculators. You can look it up in several places. And so at some point in time, I made the decision, and I guess I have to talk about the fertility issues I had to begin with. Some of my land, and my land is almost flat. People think it's flat, it's not, but, but it looks flat from the road. And class 1 and class 2 soils. So it's good soil. And it had been farmed dry land and it was homesteaded in the 1870s and farmed dry land for all of those years up until I developed irrigation in 1977. And it didn't work. It never did work. I mean, my dad was growing dryland corn when I was a little kid, and my most enduring memory of my dad is him looking at the sky and hoping that we would get a little shower for his corn. A lot of years we didn't get it. I can literally remember him going out and just picking the good spots and leaving the rest for the cows to eat. That's how it was. You wouldn't get any. And in fact, I think the best he ever grew was 40 or 45 bushels an acre. And what that does, especially when you're tilling, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's been pretty well shown that tillage is what destroys organic matter. It comes out of North Dakota State, pulled a hood behind a tillage tool in 1994 and caught the CO2 coming out of the soil and proved that carbon is coming out of your soil every time you till it. That's just the truth. That's in addition to the 7,500 of moisture you lose when you till soil on average, if the water is there. But since when I found that out, I cut down on tillage immediately. And I no-till farmed for a few years, but I wanted to, as I said, be part of the solution. So that's at some point I finally switched to grass because I could see grass was better. But I had soils that were under 2 organic matter that had been farmed down to that point, to where they were under 2. And I still have 35 acres of virgin sod, never been plowed. And that was testing at the same time, was testing 8 and 9% organic matter. So they had farmed out all of that organic matter, and that's what I had to work with. And you can still see that, still to this day, even after 20 years of grass, you can tell where it was farmed and where it wasn't, if you know what you're looking for. It still hasn't completely fixed it. But back to the hay thing, that's why I thought, and why I ended up making a decision about, I suppose, 10 years into having grass, that I was going to buy my hay. Because it was just like bringing in fertility. It was bringing in fertility. And now after 10 years of it, still to this day, if I feed a good bale of alfalfa on some of the poorer ground, the next summer you can see right where that bale rolled out, and it'll be like that much taller than what's on either side of it, still to this day. Grass hay doesn't do it that dramatically, but grass hay helps too. If nothing else, you're creating a lot of manure in a small area. But that is why I say hay is fertility. There's a flip side to it too, because I was making hay in the early years too. And stopped making hay as and it took a couple years. I won't say that just 1 year convinced me of this, but when you had one of those strips that I showed you earlier that you hayed, and then right next to it you grazed one, and you did them roughly the same time, and then you watch it, and the grass where you grazed will have grown that much before the hayed ground grows any at all. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, that grass, if it's got moisture in the summertime and it's grazed high, just jumps back. It's just almost instant. And that hay ground has been hurt. There's no question about it. And it doesn't come and doesn't produce nearly as much feed. And that played a big part in my decision to just plain stop haying. But I went back to haying this year. And that's it. That's not all of it, but that's one of the strips. And what I did is I waited until the grass was dormant, until it got good and cold. It was done, I believe he baled it on the 23rd and 24th of October. And no net, no nothing, and I had him make them like that tall. And now this winter, I'm waiting for bad weather. I hope it doesn't come, and I hope I get to graze them on when it looks just like this. But if I get a heavy snow, I'll put the cows in there. And I'll try, and if I can get out there, I'll try and give them a day or two's worth at a time. But if the weather's bad enough, I may just give them the whole thing. And I've already had enough trouble with them getting in there when I didn't want them to get in there to know that they are going after that hay pretty readily. They like it. And the way I looked at that is I'm not losing any growth there because it wasn't going to grow anyway. It was done for the year. So that's why I waited till the last of October before I did it. And of course, my grass is more vegetative at that stage than dryland grasses or even non-grazed grasses because it's been grazed and restarted. So it has a vegetative growth to it, which that's why the hay is still good on October 23rd. And still to this day, I'm grazing grass that I grew this August, September. I will not feed cattle today at all. And they're living on my grass still to this day. I haven't had any questions about stocking rate, and that's a good thing because most people, their minds when they ask about stocking rate, they're thinking about summer stocking rate. Well, I'm grazing cattle year round, so I need feed year round. And if there's no snow on the ground, I'm not going to be feeding. Not the cows. If I've got yearlings, which I usually do, I'll feed the yearlings, but the cows, they're on their own. They got to make their own way as long as there isn't snow, and you'd be surprised how happy they are to go out and graze this old frozen grass. I mean, it's what they want to do. So, what did I want to say about that? Oh, in the spring, this has to do with my calving dates and when I wean. I calve really late, for what most people consider late, but May and June, I try and calve when the deer are having babies. I don't want to fight weather, I don't have to. And so by calving that late and then weaning at 10 months, I move my weaning date clear back into March. And when I wean those calves off those cows, the calves obviously I have to pen them up, so I have to feed them. But those cows will beller, of course, like they do and try and get at those calves, but I don't feed those cows after that. After March 10th, I'm done feeding them, unless it snows. But as long as it doesn't snow, those cows are on their own. And here's the thing, I have to drive down the road with feed right by the cows. They won't even lift their heads. They're happier out there grazing than they would be eating the hay. So, and there's a reason for that. And that's because there's a little bit of green grass coming up in there. by that time. And we all know what the hardest time to hold a cow in is when she's trying to get out and get that green grass. Well, I let them have it. And I get told, and I mentioned the magazine earlier, there's an article in there every year about don't turn out too early. But I had the good fortune of attending a couple days with a guy named Ian Mitchell Innes from South Africa. And his whole thing was, he said, if you take care of your cattle on this grazing thing, the grass will take care of itself. The grass will adapt to that, and how do I explain that? It's, if you leave a lot of grass behind and it makes the cattle do good, then that's what you need to do. But in the spring, what a cow wants and what a cow needs, she hasn't had any of that green grass since October. That's what she wants, and I think it's also what she needs. And so I will leave. I like to have grass that's maybe about that tall. That's where I'll start out in the spring. And when I say that tall, I mean the grass from the previous year. And so then when you turn them into that and there's a little bit of green in the bottom of it, they'll eat all of that old stuff in order to try and get that green stuff that's down in it. And so that grass I grew the previous year gets used then. And I get told that I'm grazing too short. But by mid-July, you can't tell. You can't tell that I did that.
That helps stimulate it to grow anyway when I eat it.
They say yes, that their saliva, yes.
We seem to have a problem not putting them out soon enough. We keep rolling them in, thinking we gotta let it get a little taller, and then what happens is later on, we find out we should have turned them out sooner because the last step that they get to is already reproductive, and then it doesn't grow back once they've eaten it. So then when we start over again,
That's
stuff isn't very good.
That's a good point. It helps you keep it vegetative by getting on it quick and hammering it hard there in the. Well, I can quit any time, so you just tell me how much time I have. But so it's not what you think, and it's not even what people tell you. And I think maybe that's the biggest, and that's become the new word for it too, is adaptive grazing. And I think that's the key thing, is to observe what's happening with your own system and adapt. And that's what I've done, and that's, when I do that short grazing, it changes what comes there the next year. And it always increases diversity. And by the way, I've had some walks here in the last few years that were with Game and Parks, and was told that I might have the most diverse fields that they had ever seen. Was told that I certainly had hundreds of species, if not possibly even thousands of species growing there. Just all kinds of stuff, you name it, it's growing, including stuff I hadn't seen before I started doing it. And hopefully I can get this next picture to show up. Well, there's some pictures of the goats there in their shelter on a cold day. We couldn't get them to come out. I wanted to make sure and talk about this because cedar trees are, it's a dirty word in northeast Nebraska anymore for anybody that has a pasture that's remote. And this picture proves something. And I spotted this 10 years ago. I haven't been able to convince anybody that I'm right, but I've been telling people for about 10 years that if you run cattle on grass in the winter, you will not have cedars. If you drive around the country and look where the cedars are, they are summer pastures exclusively, every time. I've yet to find an exception to this, where there are cedars in a field that gets grazed on any regular basis in the wintertime. Everybody right away wants to know why, and I don't know for sure why, but
I imagine the goats might have something to do with that.
thing is, I didn't run goats on this particular field. That's why I picked this fence line. I've got lots of fence lines that look like this. In fact, all of them do pretty much. The trees aren't necessarily that big. But I didn't put goats in this field at all until 2 summers ago, and have never put them in there in the winter, and never seen them mess with the cedars either. What I'll find, and my theory, and it's just a theory, I can't prove it, but you'll find cedar trees that tall, dead as a stone. And what I believe happens is that they graze the grass down around them, and that those little tiny seedlings need that grass for protection. And so once the grass gets grazed down around them, but again, that's just a theory. That's just me trying to figure out why. But I do know this for a fact, and that's that if you regularly pasture a field in the winter, you won't have cedar tree infestation at all. You can look on either side there, and there are none. And that's the case on my entire place. All of those, I have 24 of those strips altogether, and most of the fence rows have at least some, and not just cedar trees either. There's other kinds of trees that are starting in there too. But I don't have really any cedars growing anywhere but under those fence lines. I guess there is one exception. I've got a couple of paddocks that were leased out and not planted to grass until 2014, and he had cedars starting in his no-till farm. He was no-till farming, and so there are a few cedars there. But the land I've been grazing since 2004, there are no cedars unless they're under that fence. And this, by the way, what's on the right was one of the fields that I never did seed to anything at all. It's just what's there is what came. So what else? I just thought of something else too, if I can think of it. Goats do, you were right about one thing though, and that's that goats will eat cedar, particularly in the winter. And in fact, this is something that I like to do is if I've got a cedar tree that I want to cut down, I'll pull it into I've got the goats confined right now in around those buildings, and because they have some kids that are small enough, I really don't want them dragging them all over the place. So, but I'll go get a cedar tree and cut it off and drag it in there so that they have something, they play in it and eat leaves off of it, and they'll even eat the bark, which, by the way, don't let goats into trees that you want to grow. They will kill them. They'll eat the bark right off of them. And any other questions? We had great questions already.
Are you rotating your goats behind your cattle or anything?
Well, I have only a 4 pasture rotation for I have 2 80s that are fenced separately, each one of them separately, and then 2 quarters that are also fenced separately. And that's the only rotation I do is from around those 4. But as I said, I don't have enough goats to really, they're so happy. That's why they don't get out on me, is because they've got so much food that they really don't hammer anything. And I also want them to wander around because the spurge is patchy. It's here and there. And so if I was going to fence them, there'd be areas where I wouldn't want to fence them, and there'd be areas where I would. It would not be easy to do. And so I just do it on, like I said, a larger basis, and I do rotate them, no question about it, but I'm more rotating them in order to try and get all the spurge than anything else. That's my major goal. My first goal with them, I wasn't trying to get income, I was just trying to get the spurge handled. So, sure.
Before you got, did you
you have sheep and goats?
I never did have them together. I did not. There's really no reason for that. I've been considering getting sheep almost ever since I got the goats to add to them. And I think I could run them right with them. I don't think there's any reason I couldn't just run them all together. But I haven't done that. And again, this goes back to being old and washed up. I just don't have the energy to do it all. So, but it would work, and I don't know any reason why it wouldn't. And the more different species, the better off you are. I wanted to mention this. It's a story that's fresh in my mind, but once it's probably been a month ago now already, but I was wondering what the goats were eating. They were moving through an area and they were eating, they were clearly eating, but they weren't putting their heads down on the ground. And I carry binoculars for this very reason. And so I got the binoculars out to see, and they were just walking along, stripping the seeds off of western ragweed plants, just one right after another, just like it was candy. So, this is why multi-species is important. They eat things that the cows aren't going to eat. And again, that's why I switched to goats over sheep. Sheep are more like cows, no question about it. Their preferred diet is more like cows. So that played a part in my decision, no doubt about it. And if you think about it, where we stand and the land I'm working out there, what I'm doing is my closest possible imitation of what was going on here before white men came out here and destroyed it all and killed all the buffalo. The cattle are the buffalo and the goats are the antelope. That's the way I look at it. Sure.
Do you supplement your livestock with anything in season?
The only thing I supplement with, the only thing they get outside the hay is a evaporated sea salt. It's called C90. The reason I use that is which this is a little factoid that you can win bets with your friends at wherever you bet with your friends, but ocean water has the exact same mix of minerals in it as our blood and as in any mammal's blood. I think actually it's any blood at all. They all have the exact same mix, and I mean right down to the decimal point, as ocean water. And so somebody down in western Mexico is flooding salt flats and cutting the water off and letting it evaporate. And then I've seen pictures of it. They're taking payloaders in there and pushing up piles of this evaporated sea salt, and that's all I feed. I did feed minerals for years and years, and decided to just go with just strictly this salt, because I thought, well, it's all in there. And I figured by then my soils were getting more mineralized. So I switched to that, and I haven't noticed any problems. And I've been with that now for at least 3 years. And as far as I can tell, it works fine. Okay?
So what time do you prefer to move your cattle out in winter?
What time of day?
What time of months?
That totally depends on when I decide the paddock I'm in is getting ground down to where I don't want them to take it any shorter. That reminded me of something that just happened the other day that I really got a kick out of, and I wanted to be sure and mention. And that's that I'd fed a real good bale of hay, it was mostly alfalfa, but on some grass that was probably that tall and obviously dormant and drying out, and the grass was already there, the cattle were already in that field. But they worked so hard to get that hay that the strip that I rolled that hay out in, the grass was all gone also, clear to the ground. There's just nothing left. But they ate all of that grass in the process of trying to get all that hay. Ate every bit of it. I'd have taken a picture of it if I'd had my camera with me, but I didn't. But you know, that's what they'll do. They'll even eat stuff that they don't necessarily want to eat in order to get what they do want to eat. It's real similar to what I said about the green grass in the spring. They'll do the same thing in the spring. So he's coming to get me, so if there's anything
One time,